space hotel, and the place that brings like everything new into this country in Georgia. We talked a lot with Nino and decided to give this amazing room to the new initiative, which is Democracy Frontline Center, and Nino will talk about it more. So, welcome to Stamba, and I wish you big success as an organization, and I believe as I follow our projects, what we started, it will be like one of the new stepping into the democracy and development in Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please give a big applause to the Valeria. Because I don't know any ideas when it comes to people that they cannot make it in one day. And thank you so much, because he's really a great friend of mine, and he's a partner in many different things. And I'm really honored to be his friend and his partner on different issues, because he's a man of values, and all his team, Levan and other people who are helping us all the time to having the Leadership Academy for Development with the Francis Fukuyama, having the Tbilisi International Conference together with the McCain Institute, having G-Close to Europe there with the Swedish government, and many other initiatives which is supported by the Ajara Group. And thank you so much, my dear friend, for this again. Our Democracy Frontline Center, as you are aware, last year in October, we announced together with these people. We are just missing the Professor Francis Fukuyama, but he will be back in October in Georgia again. And me, David Kramer, Valerie, and Frank came to idea to having the Democracy Frontline Center here in Tbilisi. Because I think why in Georgia, whenever we ask this question, of course we're facing a lot of challenges and the problems, but still in this region, this country is a really place for the future democracy and future development, because I strongly believe that if Georgia will succeed in this battle for freedom and democracy, other countries like Ukraine, Moldova, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and many other countries who are on the front line with this Russian front line will succeed in this battle. And even Russia will succeed in this battle if we're going to succeed. Thank you so much again for coming. And I would like to announce today that this Democracy Frontline Center will be chaired by the Professor Francis Fukuyama. He's going to be a chairman of the board. And with my great honor, and I'm thrilled that Mr. David Kramer agreed to become the director of the center. And whenever it comes to the word democracy, for me it's associated with David, because he's the most freedom fighter in this world who can fight for their values, which is freedom, democracy, and to support other freedom fighters all around the world to make our values strong and developed. Thank you, David, being today with us, and please, we're looking for your special address. After David's special address, it's going to be a video address of the Professor Francis Fukuyama, and then we're going to continue in the Stamba Amphitheater, and Beka Gochiashvili, our national proud and very famous jazz virtuos, will play for freedom and democracy as well. Thank you so much again for coming, and now David.
Thank you very much. Let me just say that none of this would happen without Nino. And the Economic Policy Research Center is the most amazing organization I have encountered. We first met in 2015. My life has never been the same. And I am a frequent visitor here to Georgia because of Nino. So please join me in giving Nino a round of applause. So Nino asked me to make a few remarks, and I will be brief because There's a performance that you all came here for. But let me also, before doing so, thank Valerie and Levon and the whole JARA group for being such strong supporters of this initiative. This space is fantastic. This hotel is fantastic. So thank you very much for all that you're doing. It was Winston Churchill who famously said that democracy is the worst system except for all the others. And Churchill was absolutely right. Democracy is not a perfect system of government. It is in constant need of correction. But democracy, in fact, provides the institutions and mechanisms for that improvement, for that correction. The United States has been a democracy for over 240 years. We went through a civil war. We went through a crisis involving the war in Vietnam. We are a very polarized society these days. We are far from perfect. I live in the state of Florida now after living in Washington, D.C. for 24 years. I live in a state that no matter how many elections it has, it doesn't know how to count votes, unfortunately. It's quite embarrassing. That reminds me that as Americans, we should bring a strong dose of humility when we assess other countries around the world. We should acknowledge that we are not perfect. We should acknowledge that we still face challenges and problems. But just because we do face those challenges, we also have a responsibility as the most powerful democracy in the world to speak out when we see democratic backsliding, abuses of human rights, violations of freedom around the world. This Democracy Frontline Center is critically important because, as Nino said, Georgia is an island in a sea of some instability in the region, where we see challenges to democracy on many different fronts. It is critically important that those of us who benefit from living in free societies do everything we can to make sure that people who don't live in free societies one day enjoy the opportunity that we have. We sometimes take for granted that we live in free societies where elections matter and elections have consequences, where freedom of assembly, freedom of association are allowed. Sometimes those freedoms are challenged by authorities. And when they are, we have a responsibility to speak out. We also have a responsibility to serve as models, imperfect though we may be, for human rights activists, democracy advocates, freedom fighters around the world. They look to the democratic community of nations for support, for moral support, political solidarity, sometimes financial help. And we have a responsibility to be there in their time of need. An organization that I used to run, Freedom House, has documented 13 years in a row of decline in political rights and civil liberties around the world. This is not a precipitous decline, but it has been a steady erosion in freedom throughout the world. And yet it's important to remember that there are far more democracies and countries in Freedom House's free category today than there were when this Freedom in the World survey was started in the early 1970s. And yet, there is not a linear path to freedom. There is not an automatic move toward democracy. You have to fight for this every single day. And it means that you have to vote. There is terrible apathy when it comes to elections in my country. I was in Ukraine, where 63% of voters in both rounds turned out to vote. That puts my country to shame, where we're lucky if we get 50% turnout in elections. You just saw in Ukraine a peaceful transfer of power, just 5 years after what turned out to be tragically a bloody revolution that led to a change in power. But Ukrainians once again demonstrated that they are capable of electing their leaders in free and fair elections despite efforts from outside powers to engage in interference. Your country and Ukraine have something very much in common. Part of your territory is occupied by Putin's Russia. Your country and Ukraine have a lot in common, which is your people demand better from their government. You demonstrated, almost 16 years ago, your readiness to turn out and demand better, and demand for change. At a time when there is significant apathy, when there is almost complicity by some political figures in authoritarian moves around the world, including in some countries you would not expect it from. It is very important and a model to see Georgians and Ukrainians and others demand better from their governments, from their societies. This is not simply a level playing field where you are trying to create a democracy here. Your efforts are being actively blunted and stymied by a country to your north that does not want to see you succeed. They don't want to see democracy succeed anywhere. By they, I mean, let me be clear, the Putin regime, which views success in Georgia or Ukraine or Moldova or any other country in the region, and by success I mean democratic progress, economic prosperity, and integration with the European community. Putin sees that as a threat to his system that he has overseen for 19 years. Ukraine just brought to power its 6th president since independence in 1991. Belarus and Russia combined have had 4 presidents at the same time period. You have had transition here in this country, and it has been peaceful and it's been through the voting booth. That's how it's supposed to be. But there are citizens around the world, including not far from here, who don't enjoy that same freedom, don't enjoy those same rights. And so every day, while we're striving to improve our own political systems, we also have to remember that we need to provide a boost and support to those struggling elsewhere. So this Democracy Frontline Center provides an indispensable resource for human rights activists and democracy advocates throughout the region. Hopefully word will spread that this center is here, that people can turn to it, and it will be facilitated in that effort by all of you here tonight, by spreading the word that Georgia, Tbilisi, and the Stamba Hotel and the Economic Policy Research Center stand with them in their fight for freedom and democracy around the world and in this region. So now that the door's closed, I'm going to end. I want to again thank Larry, you, and the hotel, Nino, and now you'll hear from another person who plays an important role in this, my friend and colleague from Stanford University, Frank Fukuyama, who I think is available via video. Thank you.
Hello, this is Francis Fukuyama. I'm the director of the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law at Stanford University. I would like to celebrate the opening of the Democracy Frontline Center in Tbilisi. This is a very important institution for the strengthening of democracy in the entire region. I'd like to congratulate Nina Knidza for her work in putting it together. I'd like to thank all of those that have been able to support the work of this center. I look forward to being able to participate in person. I'm sorry I can't be there for the opening ceremony, but best of luck to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I would like also to add that the center is named by the Fukuyama Democracy Frontline Center, and we are really honored to having his name on the top of the center, because he's a man. I don't think that he needs too many introductions, but he is a man who is in person trains all freedom fighters, democracy leaders all around the world, and especially the countries in the Frontline Center. He already have more than 100 fellows in Ukraine, more than 100 fellows in Georgia, and he's trying to lead the Georgia and Ukraine as well, and to make the Tbilisi Democracy Frontline Center as a hub of all freedom fighters in a region where the democracy under attack. And we have to unite our efforts to defend our values and to be on the right side. And thank you so much again, Professor Francis Fukuyama, David Fender, to make this happen here in this country. Thanks a lot. And now we're all of you invited to the performance by the Beka Kochiashvili at the Stamba Amphitheater, and he's going to play for our freedom and democracy. Thank you so much, and look forward to continue